to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We've all faced situations where we didn't get what we want, or even what we expected or thought we signed up for. Maybe you bought a big ticket item that fell apart and now you're trying to get your money back. Maybe you were unfairly treated at work, or maybe that chocolate chip cookie that you've been looking forward to all day, you've now discovered has no chocolate chips in it. It doesn't matter how big or small your outrage might be, whether you feel ripped off or just plain disrespected, there are ways to voice your complaint effectively to make sure that you're heard and that you get what you want. Tonight, our special guests are going to teach us exactly how to become highly effective complainers in a way that is assertive but also fair. First, I'm so pleased to welcome Amy Fish. She's the author of I Wanted Fries With That, How to Ask for What You Want and Get What You Need. She's also the ombudsperson at Concordia University in Montreal, where she's responsible for promoting fairness and making sure everyone's voice is heard. Amy regularly teaches, speaks, and writes about how to complain effectively, stand up for yourself, and get what you need. Thank you so much for joining us, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're actually giving away a copy of your book tonight to our viewers, and thank you very much for that. So if you'd like to win your very own copy of I Wanted Fries With That, and who couldn't use a handy guide around the house to effective complaining, all you have to do is go to our Facebook page, like the show, and comment below. We'll do a draw at the end of the week, and if you are the lucky winner, you just have to come pick it up at our studios at 475 Richmond Road. I'm so excited to introduce our second guest, Eli Labaki. Eli is a lawyer who practices in the area of human rights, labor, and employment and professional discipline, with a large focus on policing. He manages high-profile human rights matters for the general public and is often sought by the media to provide his legal opinion and expertise to issues across the province. Welcome to the show, Eli.
Thank you for having me this evening.
Now, as always, our guests are excited to hear from you and provide their advice. The phone lines are now open. Please call 613-728-1001. That's 613-728-1001 if you have a question for our guests. I thought we could start our conversation tonight by asking you both how you got into this line of work. Amy, I wanted to ask you first, how did you get into this industry as a complaint expert? Did you grow up in a family of complainers, or was it always more about just championing the underdog?
I grew up in a family that champions the underdog. My father, Morris Fish, is a retired Supreme Court Justice. Before that, he was a criminal defense attorney. And my mom taught emotionally disturbed children. So our dinner table conversation was always about how to make things more fair.
People who got the shorter end of the stick in life.
Yes, and trying to even the playing field. We all felt a personal responsibility to make the world a better place, and my parents were excellent role models in that way.
What about you, Eli? What made you decide to pursue this field of work? What are some of the injustices that keep you up at night and motivate you to keep fighting the good fight?
Well, it's an interesting story. I went into law because my sister was actually a lawyer, so she paved the way for me, and I took a different path. I wanted to be this Hollywood lawyer, right? What we see on TV, what we believe is what lawyering is. In law school, I got a phone call from a private number. I don't know who it is to this day, and it was a person who told me that this is someone they referred to me, and they said, "You're someone I can trust." I was told I can trust you, and they told me their story. It was rather a gruesome, detailed sexual assault, and to this day, I don't know who the person is, and I realized after that phone call, after taking it all in, that social justice might be something that I need to get into and defend marginalized populations, vulnerable people that don't have a voice, to fight them, fight for them, fight for their rights, advise them of their obligations and what they can do in those options.
What does justice mean to you?
Well, that's the million-dollar questions. I always ask my clients that after they give me their facts. What is justice? What does it mean? And it's subjective. Justice is context-bound. It depends. So to some people, it's a financial remedy. To other people, it's an apology. It's an acknowledgement of what's taken place and how they felt. And you can't discount that and the impact that has, now how important that is. But unfortunately, justice comes at a price. Okay, and we're not talking financial, we're talking the time, that you put into it, the distress, the psychological harm, the re-victimization, especially for survivors of different types of situations. So you, as a lawyer, your job is to explain that to your client, to really go through that and explain to them and hold them by the hand and really tell them this is what the process looks like. It's going to take maybe a year, 6 months, 2 years. It may take some time, and really educate them on that topic.
I want to talk later on in the show about what it means to pick your battles and when do you know it's time to walk away. But first, Amy, I wonder if you could take us through what is the role of an ombudsperson? What exactly is their role? What do they do? And what kind of institutions generally have ombudspeople?
An ombudsperson is responsible for promoting fairness. So that means that if somebody feels that they've been treated unfairly or unjustly, they can come forward with a complaint or a request for assistance. There is a wide range of applications or a wide range of places that have ombudspeople. Most universities in Canada, some colleges, many healthcare institutions. In Quebec, it's the law that every healthcare institution, no matter whether it's a community service or a huge tertiary care hospital, we have to have an ombudsperson.
So are you a third party or are you hired by the institution?
I love this question because I work for Concordia in my case, and people always ask me, well then how are you fair if they're paying your salary? But my entire job is to be fair. If I always said the students or the faculty, whoever the complainant was right, then I wouldn't be doing my job. And if I always found the university was right, I wouldn't be doing my job. So I'm there to balance in the middle.
And how many complaints do you think you've heard throughout your career?
Throughout my career, I have heard several thousand complaints.
Wow.
I actually calculated it for fact checking for the book.
And so what's the craziest complaint you've ever heard?
My favorite complaint comes from when I worked in long-term care. Somebody came to see me because she said the kitchen had a vendetta against her husband. Would you like to know why?
Yes.
The husband was getting too many broccoli stems in his lunch and not enough florets.
Wow.
And I chose to investigate it because the woman was very upset. And it turned out that this institution was buying frozen broccoli. And if you buy your broccoli frozen, you have more stems than florets. So I like this complaint because it shows that the answer wasn't to go to the kitchen and pick out, like all the florets for this guy, but the answer was to give them information so that they understood and they learned that it wasn't some big conspiracy. It was actually just the way the broccoli was being purchased.
Everyone was getting an equal amount of the undesirable parts of the broccoli, right?
Yeah.
Eli, when do people come to seek out your services? Is it generally after they've tried everything else, when they're sort of at their wits' end?
So it depends. Sometimes you get it at the beginning, sometimes you get it at the very end, and I would strongly advise against waiting to the very, very end, because at that point you have exhausted part of the most important part of lawyering, which is as a lawyer, you advise the person of their obligations and their rights, but you get a lawyer for a strategy. The lawyer helps you strategize. So in collaboration with the law, they get the facts from you, and then they create some sort of intersectionality and a game plan, really, if you want to think of it that way. And the difficulty when somebody comes to you at the very, very end, when they've exhausted all those options, your ability to run that strategy through the process becomes increasingly difficult. Coming at the beginning, it's a bit easier because you can manage expectations, and our duty as legal counsel is really managing expectations and really what do you want at the end of the day? Just like Amy had told you a story, I had a client that came to me recently and said, I've been terminated from my job. And she worked for a medium-sized organization. The executive director was very difficult. The board was very complacent and complicit to a lot of harassment that was taking place. So this individual called me. We spent about 4 hours on the phone the first time and 2 hours on the phone the second time. And ultimately, we discussed the case at length, and I said, listen, if you want your job back, I'll get you your job back. But do you really want your job back? Do you really want to go back to an environment where you're constantly harassed, you're bullied, and there's no progression in this organization? What does justice mean to you, and how much justice can you afford? So I said, sit on it for 3 days and call me back. So in the interim, it actually took her a little bit longer to call me back, but when she did, she had found employment elsewhere in a bigger organization, in a better position, and she also found a teaching position. This is a very, very sophisticated individual, young professional, has everything going for her, and a very social justice warrior type person. So really, really happy to be able to help her. And at the end of the day, it's just a phone conversation. And sometimes it's just about talking to people and just caring and showing feeling and emotion. And, as lawyers, we do have souls. We don't sleep on beds of money at night. We do genuinely care about our clients, and we do carry that with us. So
you provide some counsel on when it's realistic to walk away. What are some realistic outcomes of pursuing justice in the legal courts? But I imagine that since people need to invest money in your services, that they usually seek out the services of a lawyer because they're looking for some tangible material compensation. I imagine that they probably wouldn't hire a lawyer because they just want an apology.
Yes and no. Sometimes there is a financial remedy that is warranted, or damage, if you want to call it that, but not all the time. Sometimes it's really about public interest. It's really about public interest and modifying a policy, addressing a culture of harassment, of gender-based discrimination, and wanting to change that. A lot of the clients that come to me know that I'm a social justice lawyer, and my practice is really revolving around helping the community and helping organizations do better. I do help employers draft policies and do better for their employees, and I encourage employees to challenge employers to improve. And so it's not always about the money. Some of them are gainfully employed. Others are marginalized, yes. So they're vulnerable populations and they're marginalized. But that doesn't mean that you can't solicit the services of a lawyer. Lawyers are mandated to help particularly vulnerable populations and marginalized individuals like the homeless.
We're just about to go to break, but I want to hear from you really quickly, Amy. What are most people who seek out your services, what are most people looking for?
Most people are not sure what they're looking for.
Interesting.
And part of my role is to help them figure out what the options are.
And to stand up for themselves. Yeah, and are there certain themes that you see more often than others?
I work in the academic sphere, so people are usually looking for justice in terms of grades, in terms of exams. It could be hiring practices on the faculty side.
Okay, but in your book you look at all sorts of everyday situations, and when we come back from the break I want to look at some of those. Amy Fish talks us through how to send back your meal at a restaurant, how to get the guy in front of you to stop reclining his chair, and other everyday matters of importance, right back after the break. Good evening. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. Not every squeaky wheel gets the grease, only some do. And here in the studio tonight to teach you how to be an effective complainer and make sure that your complaints are heard and get you the results you want are special guests, Eli Labaki and Amy Fish. Now, before we went to break, Eli, we were talking a little bit about how justice looks for different people. When might someone want to walk away versus when they might want to pursue it further. And I have a question about the different kinds of clients that you might have. For instance, someone who grew up in a very wealthy family, who has a sense of entitlement, a sense of how they deserve to be treated. That might be a very different case than someone who's marginalized, who's grown up in poverty, who's grown up their whole lives getting the short end of the stick. How are they treated as they sort of progress through the system, maybe on their way to seeking out your services? How does justice look to those very different groups of people?
That's a very good question. It depends on the circumstances, it depends on the situation. With minority populations, marginalized populations, yes, they're more often than not dismissed. But they're dismissed to a point where they have to fight. Whereas the person, as you've described, from a perhaps wealthier background who feels entitled, they're just fighting just for the sake of fighting. But these individuals, they don't have a choice, and they fight from the heart. The issue often starts with them as a person, and they share their stories with other people. And they realize, wait a minute, there are other people from my community that are suffering. There are other people that are going through the same thing as me, so it's not just about me. And so it becomes a social justice type of fight. And that's when they get the backing of a lawyer and they get that assistance. And when that person's involved, when legal counsel is involved, things tend to move much quicker and much harder in a more stern fashion, if you want to call it that, because you have that legal backing and it's not okay anymore. It was never okay to begin with, but now there's that legal backing to it. So people do take you more seriously, whether you be wealthy or not.
I imagine that people who have strong research skills really kind of get a head start on the complaint process. You mentioned, Amy, that you have a story about that in your book.
Yes, I have a story about my son Benji, who was working for the first time at a real job where you punch the clock, and he wanted to know when his break time was. And there was an issue with, if you work 4 hours, you get a break, but if you take it before the 4 hours, how long is it? And he was backing and forthing with his coworkers and with the boss. And the answer we kind of gave him is, there is an answer to this. There is a law, there is a rule, you need to figure out what it is. And so my advice to everybody is, if you're wondering about break time or sick time, you're not sure what your rights are at work, you need to look it up, because you will find on the internet, depending on where you live, it's provincial, you'll find out exactly what the rules are as they apply to you.
I want to ask you something more about that, but first we have a caller on the line. Sophia, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for calling in. Did you have a question for our guests?
I do. I have a sister-in-law that has had a medical issue because of the hospitalization that she had. She got tainted blood and received hepatitis C as a result of it. And this was years ago. Now, I heard you mention saying that when you do make a complaint, to have it in a timely fashion. But I wondered if you could provide advice as to, does she have any way to make a complaint to just even cover things like her medical expenses now due to their error? Or if you would have any thoughts on that.
I just have a question for the caller. How was she notified, Sophia?
How was she notified?
Yeah.
She received a blood transfusion and afterwards had hepatitis C, so she, through the hospital, got diagnosed. This was quite a while ago.
You want to know if she received a letter or something?
Right.
Did she receive something in writing to that effect?
That is a good question. I do not know if it was in writing or in person.
Yeah, that would be my first question. If she came to me, would be, how do you have this information? And then in the letter, it might contain what your recourses were. So if she hasn't agreed to anything yet, then she needs Eli.
Yes.
Right.
There's definitely some an avenue for recourse here. There's definitely been a harm that's been done, and they've admitted to it. I would strongly advise her to consult with legal counsel. The facts of the case, every case is different, so the facts as to the statute of limitations on something like this, the statute of limitations being the timeline wherein you can litigate, and are there other people that have gone through a situation like this? Is this is there a trend? Is this medical malpractice? So you definitely you have a lot of levels, a lot of different areas to look at, to examine and deal with the situation.
Does that answer your question?
Sense. Yes, it does.
Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you.
So before our caller called in and joined the conversation, we were talking a little bit about the importance of research, and of course you alluded to that in your answer right now to Sophia, Eli, in terms of looking for forums, looking for other people who've gone through the same situation. So really kind of putting in that those hours of research to see sort of what else is out there, who else has had an issue like mine. And I guess this is especially relevant to people who may not necessarily have deep pockets to afford a lawyer, so they want to perform some background work at first, right?
Right. So to answer Sophia's question in a little bit more detail, you want to look at the trends. Has this happened before? So you want to look at news articles. You have to look at their policies. What's the policy in dealing with something like this? Are there regulations? Are there laws? How is there a complaint process? Is there an ombudsperson? Is there a person responsible, a tribunal or a court that deals with something specifically like this? And I mean, Google is your friend, right? So online, it does help you, give you a preliminary understanding, and you also want to seek the assistance of a lawyer who will explain to you the process, because once you understand the process, then you can understand how to advise your lawyer accordingly. Otherwise, you're just giving facts and you don't really know what's going on. So you really have to have that dialogue with your support person, with your legal counsel in that respect, because cases are often lost on procedure. You can read the law. You can read the law. You can read the policy. However, the procedure itself is very complex.
What I find interesting in my experience is that no one ever kind of puts all your rights on a platter and serves it to you and says, here are all your rights. You really kind of have to seek them out yourself. Is that your experience as well?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
We have another call on the line. Emily, are you with us?
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for calling in. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I think this might be for Eli, but it kind of falls under the topic of when to let go. My previous employer won't send me my pay stubs. It was never done that way. It was just through e-transfer. And I'm requesting it. I've been requesting it for a couple months because I don't think my payments were correct. And so I'm kind of in a situation where could my complaint kind of really taint her, because it's a small business. So I'm not sure how to proceed really.
That's a very good question. So first part of your question is when to let go. Never let go. You should always fight.
There's no statute of limitations?
So yes, there's definitely a statute of limitations. I mean, it depends on obviously the circumstances, but you should always fight for your rights because you're challenging the system. You're challenging whether or not what happened to you was wrong. Point blank, yes, there's definitely an issue there. Make sure everything's in writing. You can potentially go to the labor board. You can seek the assistance of a legal aid support center or a legal aid clinic. The University of Ottawa has one. And see whether or not they could potentially assist you in that respect. But have everything in writing. If it's a small business, I mean, a letter from a lawyer sometimes is more than enough or just a phone call from a lawyer. Most of the time, it's a letter is enough to, explain to them, these are your legal obligations, you have not fulfilled them, and this is how much money is owing. Failing to, remedy the situation will lead to litigation. Govern your future actions accordingly.
Those are some great resources, Eli, and from my own personal experience, it's amazing how just a simple letter on legal letterhead can move things along. Did you have something to add to that?
Well, before we get to that, I'm wondering how the caller knows that there's a miscalculation in her pay.
Are you still on the line, Emily?
Yeah. There was a shared document with tax deductions and everything, but it was shared to my my previous work email, so I don't have access to it anymore. And the amount I was paid for my last 2 weeks doesn't line up with my hourly rate and what the deductions should have been.
So you have two complaints, to be clear. One is that you haven't received the correct paperwork, and two is that you believe there's a discrepancy in your pay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So just make sure to keep that in mind when you're asking for help.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling in, Emily. Before we go to our next break, I want to go through some of the scenarios that you mentioned in your book for how to complain and be heard. So let's pick a scenario where you're in a restaurant, you've ordered a meal, you didn't get what you expected, maybe it's not fresh or it tastes terrible. How do you send it back and make sure that A, they don't spit in whatever the next meal they bring to your table might be, or that you don't get charged for two different entrees? How would you handle that situation?
Well, what I normally tell people, if they're very concerned about someone spitting in their food, then I suggest they eat in a restaurant where you could see the kitchen.
An open kitchen.
That's the only way I could think of to prevent it, because really, I've always thought that was just a rumor or kind of an urban legend, but people do really concern themselves and worry about it. So that's my kind of quick, glib answer.
Yeah.
If you need to send something back, if it's not fresh, if it doesn't taste well, include the server. So ask a question like, does this look fresh to you? Is this, or sometimes you order a salad and let's say it's supposed to have walnuts on it, and the salad comes and there's like 1/8 of a walnut.
Yeah.
And so you're really unhappy because you wanted the crunch. Imagine.
Yeah.
Like imagine.
Or no chocolate chips in your cookie.
Or no chocolate chips in your cookie. That's too tragic.
Yeah.
So then you might say, oh, isn't this supposed to be a chocolate chip cookie? I'm sorry, I thought I ordered a chocolate chip cookie. Is this the chocolate chip cookie? And so I'm including you. We're all in this together. We're all looking at the cookie. What do you think? What do you think? And that gives the server an opportunity to say, oh no, I gave you an almond I'm very excited about the nuts tonight. I gave you an oatmeal cookie. or I give you the wrong cookie, or that's a snickerdoodle, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then they have a chance to switch it out.
So you kind of give some power back to the server. It's not about you kind of arguing with the server. It's not you against the server. It's you and the server against whoever didn't do their job with your salad or your cookie.
That's right, because we're looking for results. We're looking to get the cookie we want. So it doesn't matter whose fault it is or who misspoke. We just want the end result. We want the problem corrected.
When we come back from the break, I want to hear more about your advice on what do you do if your partner doesn't let go of their cell phone and flushing it down the toilet is not an option. Of course, I want to hear about what you do on a plane when you want to recline your seat and the person behind you is protesting. Of course, Eli, I want to hear more about your experience in the world of social justice. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're talking about how to become an effective complainer with special guests Eli Lobacki and Amy Fish. Now, Amy, before we went to break, we were talking about some typical scenarios that come up in one's everyday life. We talked briefly about what happens when you didn't get the meal or the food item that you were expecting and you know, how to resolve that. Now, what happens in your personal life? Let's say your partner won't turn their cell phone off, won't put it down. How do you handle that?
If you have a partner who's always on their cell phone, then you have to think to yourself, and I call this chapter setting the bar low. What is the minimum that you will agree to? So it could be that you want 5 minutes or 10 minutes a night cell phone free, or maybe it's that you get 2 nights cell phone free. But if you get your partner to agree to that, so let's say you agree that Mondays and Wednesdays you have dinner, no cell phone, then you have to shut up on the other nights and let them have their cell phone because you got what you wanted.
So it's really an exercise in negotiation.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what if you go to the store and you buy an item, let's say it's a big ticket, expensive item, and it's sort of store credit only or exchange only, and then it sort of falls apart. It's not what you expected. Is there a way to get your money back?
In those situations, what I advise people to do is be creative. Start at the store level, go back anyway with your item, box it up as best you can. Hopefully you have your receipt, and if not, then you have yourself armed with the details, like I bought this in January, I bought it on a Sunday, I bought it on clearance, or I paid full price for it, and know exactly a little brief history of what happened, how the transaction occurred. Bring it back to the store and you try. You tell them, I bought this, it fell apart, can you repair it for me, or can you send me somewhere to get it repaired? Start with that.
Okay, and then would you go up the chain if you're not getting the answer you wanted?
I would either go up the chain or I would try the manufacturer. I've packed things up and sent them to the manufacturer before, and I've had a good result.
That's an interesting point. And you would just find the manufacturer on the internet?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now we have a caller on the line. Don, are you with us?
I am.
Hi, Don. Thank you so much for calling in. What was your question?
My question is actually first a statement. I am very much the kind of person to question, wave, and try to get back or anything. And I know that because a lot of times I'm not walking. Do you have any kind of what kind of a change to be more forceful at?
I'm having a hard time making you out. Were you able to understand that? Okay, well, we'll get back to that caller later on, maybe when we have better reception. Okay, so we just talked about returning an item to the store and maybe going to the manufacturer if that doesn't work out. Now, another situation, this is a favorite situation of mine because I travel a lot. What happens when you're on the plane and you're sort of minding your own business, you're trying to get your work done, and then the person in front of you reclines their seat all the way back, which leaves you maybe unable to balance your laptop on your tray or, breathe or exist for the next 5 or 6 hours. What do you do? I mean, because the person in front of you, they purchased their seat and that seat comes with a reclining ability. How do you handle that?
Exactly. You made a perfectly good point, Barbara, that I was going to say, which is you have to remember in approaching the person that they're within their rights. So you're asking for a favor. And so how you're going to do that is you're going to get out of your seat, you're going to walk around and you're going to look the person in the eyes and you're going to say, hey, I'm behind you. Would it be possible for you to move your seat up a little bit? Because I find it's a lot easier to ignore a disembodied voice behind you, and it's harder to ignore somebody looking you right in the eye. If that doesn't work, then you start looking around the plane and see if there's any empty seat. And if that doesn't work, you can call the flight attendant over and ask for help. And if that doesn't work, then at the end of the flight, you have your flight number, you know where you were sitting. You can write not a complaint letter, but an email or fill out an online form for the airline to register your complaint.
It sounds like you have to be comfortable with a certain level of confrontation for that to work.
I think you could speak very gently and say something like, hey, I'm sitting behind you, your seat is reclined, I have a deadline, I'm trying to work, is there any way you can move your seat up a little bit? I find that not so confrontational.
Okay.
So just to chime in here, I think our previous caller I think I caught some of the words at the very end about advice on being a bit more forceful in situations, and that's something I get a lot. How do we attack? How do we go in strong? And my advice to that is you don't have to go in strong. Sometimes, you mediate. You ask nicely, hi, how are you? How's your day? Just somebody, I'm the person sitting behind you. Or once you go forceful, you can't come back from that and negotiate.
Interesting. So that should be your last resort.
Absolutely. Always go in respectfully, amicably. Explain to this is just a person just like you. So we don't have to treat the person like a number, and we'll cover that afterwards as far as how to treat employees respectfully. But treat the person like a person. Maybe they have lower back pain. You don't know that. Maybe you'll sacrifice not having that leg room if that person tells you, oh, listen, I'm really sorry, I just have really lower back pain. So then you might say, okay, maybe we can meet in the middle and halfway. Does that work? And you can be friends. It doesn't have to be always super, jumping in really, really hard. There will be a time for that. There will always be a time to fight. There will not always be a time to negotiate.
So I think both of you have made the point that sometimes you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and of course that's also a very Canadian approach, certainly compared to our neighbors south of the border. But Eli, as a lawyer who's involved in litigation, I'm sure things get ugly. I'm sure tempers flare. When is it time to assert yourself in a way that's forceful, that commands respect, perhaps even fear? There must be a place for that in the courtroom.
Absolutely. The court doesn't take too kindly to you jumping steps. Okay. So there are definitely steps. If we give it an example of an employee-employer relationship where there's harassment at the workplace, you would address it with the individual that's harassing you, and then you escalate it progressively to management. And if management doesn't respond, to your union, and then if they don't respond, you seek the assistance of legal counsel if the collective agreement permits you to do so. If you're not unionized, then yes, you can go to a lawyer, and then the lawyer can negotiate on your behalf, or send a letter and talk to another lawyer. And sometimes adding a lawyer into the mix in front of you and in front of the employer, I can tell you about a case I dealt with recently. The lawyer on the other side was extremely nice, and I was dealing with a very agitated chief of police on the other end. Having that lawyer in between and this experienced lawyer was really an absolute pleasure to deal with, and to calm their client down and myself calm mine, and we were able to negotiate something.
And Eli's point about steps works very well in any complaint, even if it's a simple one. So if your cookie doesn't have chocolate chips in it, you might start off by talking to the person behind the counter. If that doesn't work, you might ask to see a manager. If that doesn't work, you might complain to the chain. Yep. But you have to start with the person in front of you before you complain all the way to the top.
Now, I've heard the opposite. I've heard some people give counsel that you just go straight to the guy at the top, because the employees at the bottom don't have the authority necessarily to give you what you want.
In my experience, there is a lot of variability in what customer service agents can do. And so it depends on the company, depends on the time of day you're calling, the level of seniority, the type of complaint you have. And very often they do have the ability to help you, especially in the hospitality industry.
We have a caller on the line. Sarah, are you with us?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Thanks so much for calling in. What was your question?
Okay, so mine is about how to assert your consumer rights. But I guess my question is, I'm not even sure if I even have some, and it's related to having children with anaphylactic allergies. When you're in public, is there a way to sort of assert your right by, being provided accommodations and whatnot to accommodate their needs?
Like what kind of thing would you want?
Like, for example, if we were going out to a restaurant, to be able to, bring your own little dish of food for that child who couldn't eat there, type of thing.
I think that's a reasonable accommodation, and my advice would be to call ahead to the restaurant, explain the situation, and say something like, we are 11 people coming to your place for dinner. We're coming to celebrate a birthday or graduation. I really want to bring my 8-year-old, but unfortunately they need to have their own food for medical reasons. Keep it very simple.
Okay.
Because people have limited degrees of patience sometimes with allergies and a lack of understanding of the potential danger and risk.
Yeah.
So
that's
I wouldn't.
Sort of the kind of thing that we've encountered, you know, like if we're going to have a birthday party and want to bring our own cake, for example,
yeah.
they're sort of saying that it's the policy and you're not allowed.
Right. So I would be throwing around medical reasons, and I would even probably, if I could, get a letter from my physician that I could use.
Okay, that's a great tip, actually.
And
okay.
I'd like to add to that. Is it really a place where you want to celebrate your family birthday or your child's birthday if they don't want to accommodate? It seems like a very, very reasonable request, and Amy has provided you with very good tips on that. But if they don't want to accommodate your party, again, is it really a restaurant that you want to spend your money at? Somewhere where they're going to give you a hard time? I mean, restaurants always want to accommodate. Most of the time, they want to accommodate, and they want to make that experience really enjoyable. So it's shifting your perspective as to really. I mean, that doesn't seem like somewhere I would want to go, to be honest with you.
No, and it definitely helps you sort of select where you do want to go. But
Absolutely.
Sometimes, you know, when you have a child who has their heart set on, say, going to a bowling alley,
yeah,
but they're not willing to be accommodating, it's difficult to explain it at like a child level,
right.
The reasons why you're choosing not to go there. But
yeah.
Thank you so much for calling in, Sarah. Now, before we go to break, I want to talk a little bit about workplace accommodation. We have a couple minutes. Let's talk about some of the issues that come up.
So an accommodation essentially is a manner by which your employer, if we talk about it in an employee-employer relationship, an employer has a duty to accommodate you so that you can perform your duties at the same level as everybody else. Now, they have a duty to accommodate you short of undue hardship.
What does that mean? Short
of undue hardship essentially means that they have to accommodate you as best they can up to the point where they're losing either revenue, so financially they're losing money. Operationally, it's impacting the day-to-day operations of the business. So there is also always a duty. So it could be anything like, you know, putting you in an area of the office where it's less, there's less traffic, noise-canceling headphones. It could be an ergonomic chair. So it could be something just as simple as that, but it could mean the world to a person.
So small gestures can go a long way. Now, are there ways in which that might be refused that could be misconstrued or seen as discrimination?
So it's a little bit tricky. For example, if you're on probation and you're hired to work overnight, okay, and you're coming into the job, you work 2 nights and you say, well, I can't work nights anymore. I'm tired, I can't do this anymore. Well, you haven't demonstrated your ability during that probation period to fulfill the core functions, the core duties of that job. The job requires that you work overnight. You're unable to work overnight. And so the employer does not necessarily have a duty to accommodate. They might not be able to put you elsewhere. You were hired for that specific job, and you haven't demonstrated those core functions.
We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, I want to hear maybe about some examples and some case studies. Sure. And I also want to hear some advice from you, Amy, on how you would counsel a small business to handle a complaint so that it doesn't damage them. So we'll be right back after the break with lots more. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and we're talking about how to be an effective complainer with special guests Amy Fish and Eli Labaki in the studio tonight. Amy, you've come here today to talk a little bit about your book. I wanted fries with that. Although you are an expert in the art of complaining, and you've mentioned that it's actually an art form, not an exact science, you weren't always as vocal and assertive as you are. Tell me about the journey that brought you to write this book.
The journey that brought me to write this book is that I see a lot of complaints, and I notice that some are treated better than others, not only on their merit, but in how they're presented. And so this book was my personal effort to level the playing field a little bit so that everyone would have a fair chance at complaining effectively. Help people learn the skills that it takes to complain, whether it's about a small thing like lettuce or a bigger thing like some of the issues Eli's been talking about. And the third section of the book is what to do when you want justice served.
Now, fries is obviously a prominent part of your title, and I was actually reading recently that a woman in Savannah, Georgia had a shotgun and fired several shots in the air at a McDonald's because her fries were cold.
Yes.
I imagine that you didn't have a similar experience, but what happened? Like, where did the fries come from?
Well, thankfully no one was injured in that. I saw that article as well. You can imagine how many people sent it to me. But thankfully no one was hurt other than the poor woman, right? But this book is about, the title or the genesis is, one of my friends, when we were 14 years old, we went out to eat, and it was one of those places where you order and then they bring you your food, and we waited and waited and waited, and our fries never came. And before we had to go back to class, Julie said, I ordered the fries, but I'm not sure if they heard me. And we're friends to this day, so for the past 30-something years, we've all been saying, I'm not sure if they heard me, as kind of an inside way of describing what happens when you don't speak up and when you don't use your voice effectively.
And I'm sure Eli is someone who's worked with marginalized clients, so you might have some powerful examples of that. But first we have a caller on the line. Julie, are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Hi, thank you so much for calling in. What was your question?
I just had a question about, like, things have changed so much now with social media. Is it better to try to reach a company first privately if you have a concern or a complaint, versus going straight to social media, which is much more public?
What are your thoughts, Amy?
I personally don't have a lot of experience using social media to complain. I would tend to go directly to the company first, but some people are very successful tweeting their complaint or posting their complaint on Facebook. So I think you sometimes have to try a lot of different things to get the resolution you want. And I want you to think of social media as one of the tools in your toolbox, but not the only tool.
I would have to definitely agree with Amy on that. You want to be careful with social media. A lot of people are using it as a weapon to criticize different organizations or different experiences they have. You want to be careful because you might start leaning into defamation or libel, where you could be held liable for damages if you allege that something has occurred and didn't have in fact occur, or you mischaracterized a particular situation. And even if you didn't everything right, the problem is that now their back is up against the wall, right? And so now they want to fight back.
And the other risk that I'm afraid of is that you'll spend so much time on social media that you won't actually complain to the person who can resolve your problem. So if, for example, a city truck is parked somewhere that it doesn't need to be parked, instead of complaining to the city, if you complain to everyone else on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, then you're not going to get the truck moved.
Yeah, I feel like we really lose sight of what we want the outcome to be when we're emotional, and probably taking it to social media, is part of being emotional. Thank you so much for calling in, Julie. But that's a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you, Amy, in terms of what can small to medium-sized businesses do to handle a complaint without causing damage to themselves? Because I often hear business owners complaining about, oh, I received this negative online review and it's absolutely devastating to me. What are some of the things that they can do to mitigate that or prevent it from occurring?
If a company gets a complaint, a small to medium-sized company, their first responsibility is to listen. Hear the complaint and just take notes of what the complaint is and don't respond right away. So in any situation, I always advise people to say, oh, that's very interesting. What else happened? When else did it happen? What else did you want as outcome? Let me look into it and I'll call you back. Many of us, including companies, are tempted to respond right away. That wasn't me, it wasn't my company, it wasn't our parking, it wasn't our truck, and to avoid that, I think you look more receptive, and you are more receptive if you ask as many questions as possible and you try to get to the bottom of what exactly happened. What do you think?
I agree.
Should people be offered a reward for taking the time to complain? Because it might fall flat, like if you take the time to formulate a complaint and seek someone out and they say, thanks for your feedback, we'll do better next time. Well, I want you to entice me so that there is a next time. What are your thoughts?
I think if you do something for the right reasons and morally, then you shouldn't want anything in return. You shouldn't want a free meal. You shouldn't want some sort of coupon or whatever it is, a discount. You should not expect it. You should do it for the right reasons, which is essentially so that it doesn't happen to anybody else and that it doesn't happen to you in the future. And you again, it's acting in good faith. You trust that the restaurant or wherever, the service provider returns that, it understands that, it acknowledges it, doing something for something in return, then you're not really doing it for the right reasons. You're complaining to get something. You're not complaining because there's a concern.
And you wouldn't want to come across that way either.
No.
Yeah. We have a caller on the line. Stevie, are you with us?
I am.
Hi, thanks so much for calling in. What's your question?
I'm just wondering if one should be nervous about telling your boss that you're having issues and you need to be accommodated. Like, maybe he'll decide to let you go and find somebody who's healthier. Like, do you need to be concerned about that?
So that's a very good question. So if your boss does let you go for requesting an accommodation, excuse me, then you would have grounds for a human rights complaint, and you would be able to file a human rights complaint through the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario because you're being discriminated on under a protected ground of the code, which is a disability, if you have an identified disability. How you approach your employer, it's important to develop a relationship with your employer and advise them of, listen, here's the situation, try to approach them. I understand, believe me, I understand the anxiety that could come about. If you have a support person or a third party, maybe a union representative or somebody from your respectable workplace committee, to bring it up to the supervisor. If not, if you don't want to face the employer, you can send them an email and just say, I'd like to request an accommodation so that I can better serve you and be more productive for you. And then you're falling into the realm of how big is your accommodation? Is it an ergonomic chair, which can be very pricey? Or is it just, listen, I have kids at home, I'm a mother, I'm a father, and I need to come in a little bit later. So an accommodation doesn't always have to do with a disability or health. It could just be, I'm a parent, right? So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for calling in, Stevie. Really quickly, Eli, can you take us through the steps of filing a human rights complaint? Because that to me sounds sort of like getting the big guns blazing. It could be intimidating to the average person.
So, first you want to take a step back and take a deep breath and understand, is this really something I want to do?
And why wouldn't you want to do it?
The process is long. There is a backlog. There are a lot of people filing human rights complaints. I encourage people to exercise their rights, but the process is long and arduous, and again, how much justice can you afford? Okay, so the steps are very simple. They're online. You file an application under the Human Rights Code for a breach of a protected ground, and all the information is found on the social justice website, the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal website, and they give you a very clear, somewhat clear explanation as to how to file a human rights complaint. And if you're having difficulty, they have a legal aid support center, so they can actually help guide you through the application process for the Human Rights Tribunal in the event that you can't afford the assistance of legal counsel. And so then it would go into the queue, and whoever it is, let's just say an employer, they would reply, and there would be an exchange of evidence and information. You can opt for a mediation option, so long as the other side also agrees to mediation. Most of the times these matters tend to be resolved, which is good, but again, don't expect to get exactly what you want, but you have to be able to concede and meet somewhere in the middle to a reasonable understanding of what's going on.
It's kind of like that Rolling Stones song, right? Like sometimes you don't always get what you want, but sometimes if you try, you might get what you need, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know, Eli, you had some advice as well for employers out there.
Yes, treat your employees like people.
Yeah.
That's point blank, that's what it is. If you treat your employees like numbers, you will get taxed. Your employees will fight back. They will read their policies, even though they might have never read them. They will read them. They will read their collective agreements, and they will use them against you if you don't treat them fairly and in good faith and listen to them. So when you treat people like people, you get good results. And most of the time, like we talked about earlier, it's acknowledgement of what's taken place. And you'd be surprised, a lot of the biggest cases I've dealt with, especially high profile cases, the ones that had an amicable settlement, was just an acknowledgement and really helping that employee get back on their feet, and the employer is happy, the employee's happy, everyone's happy. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the employee is going to realize, I should probably speak to a lawyer, someone like me, and it's going to be a long fight, but
I've read a lot of malpractice lawsuits actually result from the person feeling that the other party was just so rude.
Absolutely.
They were treated like they didn't matter.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the example Amy gave earlier on discussing the person in front of you in the plane. Just, walking up to the person saying, "Hi, how are you? How's your day? Where are you headed? My name is Eli. I'm headed to San Francisco."
If you're going to dream, go big.
No, I'm being reasonable.
Yeah.
It's about treating people like people. And a lot of the times employers are afraid and they escape liability. They want to escape liability, and they're afraid that acknowledging that something happened is going to engage your liability, and they're going to have to pay money.
Again,
Okay.
it's the wrong reasons will sort of take you down the wrong path, I guess. Now, we just have a couple minutes left before the end of our time together, sadly. Any parting thoughts you wanted to leave our viewers with today, Amy, and where can we find you for some of the workshops and book tours that you're doing over the next few months?
My website is Amy Fish Rights. I'm all over social media, same at Amy Fish Rights. And sure, come and find me.
Yeah, and I know that you actually talk to teenagers and women about how to assert themselves and assert their rights. What are some tips that you have really quickly?
Oh boy, that speaking up works. Staying quiet never works. So you have to at least try your luck, even if your technique isn't perfect.
So the first rule of complaining is to complain.
That's right. Gotta try it.
Yeah. And really quickly, Eli, where can we find you?
So you can find me at www.labakilaw.ca. Then my contact information is on there. If you need legal advice, if you want to bounce ideas, or you need an opinion really quickly, I'm always here to lend an ear, helping ear.
And workplace issues and human rights are sort of
Absolutely
your area of practice. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure hearing your stories and your expertise.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the studio next week. Have a wonderful night.